start the training. Okay. So again, good morning. My name is Michelle Tanksley. I am the Assistant Director of Finance within the Business Affairs Department.
I'm Stacy Pereira. I manage the procurement and payments office for McCombs.
And I know this is probably a long-awaited training. This is really our last kind of official training. We've already kind of gone through all of our processes. And the entertainment is our very last training that we'll be doing. There will, of course, be some refreshers throughout the year. But entertainment is a big one because we do a lot of entertainment throughout the fiscal year. So we do have a very big agenda that we are going to try and cover within the hour-and-a-half time frame that we have. So if you do have any questions, those that are online, please type them into the chat online. If you have them in person, we're going to try and keep all the questions to the end. If there's something that's very important that you want to make sure that we may be addressed during a particular slide, feel free to raise your hand, or Stacey's going to be monitoring the online conversation. So let's go from here. Okay, come on. Okay, so on our agenda, we're going to cover what is really considered entertainment, best practices around entertainment, any entertainment that's associated with a contract or contracts. I know sometimes we have multiple contracts that are associated with one OOEF, one entertainment, or one event. Alcohol approval from the provost. When do we need that? When is that required? So when it's needed, dates. So right now our OOEF just has a to and a from. We do have a blanket OOEF option as well, but we're going to cover what's considered a single event, a multi-day event, and a blanket event. And just the official occasion expense form process, payment and reimbursement submittal. So once the event has taken place, you either need to reimburse an individual or submit an invoice for payment to a vendor. And then with that, your post-event information. And then, of course, we have our entertainment intranet dashboard. So first on the agenda, what is considered entertainment? So any entertainment expenses of UT Austin funds, meaning our department funds, should support the institutional mission and must serve a business purpose. So you've got administrative meetings. Administrative meetings must be between 2 or more individuals. It cannot be just one person. That would not be considered an administrative meeting where we can reimburse one person's lunch for something. And it cannot be a matter of convenience. So just because you're going to meet with somebody, it shouldn't be a matter of convenience to meet over lunch. Yes, we can have lunch meetings, and if that's the only time that works for everybody, that is completely fine, but we shouldn't really be it's a matter of convenience for us to have this. Official occasion, what is really defined? So this would really kind of encompass, we've got student official occasions, we've got just official occasions. So anything that's a reception, luncheon, dinner, or some type of similar event, that's meaning that it's sponsored and funded by UT. This can be associated with special programs, anything with university guests, like a lot of donor events, faculty, staff recruitment. And some examples of those are your conferences. When we're doing a conference, when we're having workshops, the brown bags, those are all kind of examples. Seminars, a lot of the development events, planned retreats, staff, that also does encompass staff meetings, unit and department morale, and kind of team building events. These are just a few examples. There, of course, are more that can encompass in that. So we just wanted to address kind of the norms that we see. So your entertainment best practices and really the time frame to submit. So best practices, we really should be submitting within 2 weeks prior to an event. And this will ensure that we do receive the appropriate approvals. So right now, the appropriate approvals are, it has to route through your administrative operations manager after you submit your request. And then after that, it routes to the financial review, which I actually do the financial review just to kind of make sure that everything that's on the OOEF is sufficient enough information. And then after that, the required is the official delegate, which is Caitlin's signature on there. And really the reason why we want to make sure, are there any questions that your AOM might have regarding the event? I might possibly have questions regarding it, or it might even get to Caitlin and she has questions about it. So we want to make sure that we give sufficient time to have all those questions answered in order to get it approved. And we also want to minimize the after the fact exception request. I mean, can you submit an OAF after the fact? You can, but that would be kind of considered like an exception request because it's after the event. Your best practice is to submit it before. There are occasions where Dean Mill's signature is required. So if it's if the university limit of $100 per person is exceeded, that is when Dean Mill's signature is required. There are some instances where it's not when it goes over that, and we will get to that later on in the slides. If alcohol is going to be the primary expense, Dean Mill's signature is going to be required on that. And for both of those, a justification is then required in both instances. And you need to provide detailed information regarding the justification and the need. Why was possibly alcohol the primary expense? I know one example is sometimes when we just have networking events and there's just hors d'oeuvres that are being served, appetizers, and then drinks, the drinks might supersede and exceed those appetizers, which that would be a detailed, information why. Please be aware, even though it does require Dean Mill's signature, there could be a chance that she might not approve it. So just because it requires her signature doesn't mean it's guaranteed it's going to get her signature. So there could be some instances where if it's $100 over the per person limit, we might need to cap it and then only $100 is reimbursed. So just be aware of that. I haven't seen that yet, but it is definitely possible. So I just kind of wanted to make note that that's not a guaranteed. Associated with contracts. So this is where that $100 per person kind of takes effect. But before we go over that, I want to kind of discuss when is a contract required. So if you have essentially any vendor that is going to require terms and conditions be signed.
To note, that means that nobody in a department is allowed to sign on behalf of the university. If a vendor is requiring a signature, it must go through to the business contracts office at UT. They are the only authorized individuals to sign on UT's behalf.
AT&T contracts, those are outside the business business contracts office. We have the DocuSign Power Form for AT&T, and that Caitlin does have delegated authority to sign on those. But the same thing, only Caitlin can sign off on AT&T contracts. Nobody within a department can do that. So caterers and servers on campus. When they come on campus, which I know we do have those instances where they're bringing food, but they're also bringing servers that are coming in order to serve the food to us. That's when UT does require a contract. And it's really just because UT requires a criminal background check on those servers that are coming to campus, and that vendor has a verification of auto insurance. So it's liability and kind of that insurance risk that UT is trying to cover. So if we have a contract with that vendor, and it's a signed, fully executed contract, then we don't have to worry about any of that. Okay. Items to include in a contract. If it's a catering vendor, 9 times out of 10, they're going to require some type of deposit. Please include that in your contract request. And I've seen some where I've got them in Contracts Plus because I review those as well before it goes to the contracts office. If it doesn't, I have sometimes, sent an email, hey, is there a deposit? If so, please put that on your contract. Main thing that it's doing, it's alleviating additional step that you might have to do in doing a prepayment request if you already have it in your contract.
Same with prepayment. If you know that this vendor is going to require payment at the time of the event, essentially UT sees that as a prepayment because we have to cut the check prior to your event. That's something that needs to be written into the contract, and it saves you steps later down the line, not having to fill out extra forms.
The next 2 are just things that the business contracts office just wanted to make sure that we address with y'all. If y'all are already talking with the vendor or even just internally within the department and you want to include gratuity, please go ahead and include that and think about that within your contract. So include that amount in your contract cost. And then they just indicate, think about how much is your anticipated spend. So
That's
you-
like if you have, say, you're working with a vendor and you establish that there's a minimum that you have to, food and beverage that you have to meet in order to work with that vendor. Don't put your minimum as the dollar amount if you're anticipating more people than that calculates. So if the minimum is, say, $1,000 based on, $100 a person, but you're anticipating that you'll probably have 20 people at that event, go ahead and write your contract estimated for $2,000, because anytime there's an overage, it affects the auditing process at the end after payment. So you really want to kind of go bigger there. OOEFs don't encumber funds, so you're not causing problems. You don't want to go outrageously over, because then Caitlin or Dean Mills may look at it and be like, no, we're not going to spend that much money. So be reasonable there, but again, build yourself a little bit of buffer. We think it could go up to this amount, because having that higher dollar there means that you'll have better luck tracking on the back end.
now, and there are instances where you did a contract for only 5,000 and you did where you're like, oh, only 50 people are going to attend. You sent out an RSVP and now you have 250 people that are going to attend. Do not wait to process an amendment, because that would definitely require an amendment to your contract terms, because it's drastically going to affect the dollar amount. So don't wait to submit amendment within Contracts Plus. Business Contracts Office will definitely work with us. Since all of our contracts are in Contracts Plus now, the approval period, I feel like I've seen it's going a lot quicker than what it used to a year or two ago. And just a reminder, any amount that's over $15,000 does require purchasing approval, the EAJ, that exclusive acquisition justification. That can sometimes take a long period of time. Because that, before any contract goes through the Business Contracts Office, the EAJ approval has to go through main purchasing. And it can get to it there when they get to it in their queue. I mean, it could be 5 days, it could be 7 days, it could be 14 days. So depending on what their queue workload is like.
And it was over 15K, it could be 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Alcohol approval. So and I'll get to the OOEF process. So right now we have, will alcohol be included on this? The alcohol approval is your provost approval. So when is this required? It's when an event is held in a building owned and controlled by UT System or UT Austin. CBA and GSB is owned and controlled by UT Austin. So if we bring alcohol into this building, that is when we would need to get the provost approval. RR Rolling Hall is controlled and owned by UT Austin. There is a portion of it that is AT&T, and that's where this exceptions to it. So the exception are the following buildings. So Cactus Cafe, well, they still have Frank Irwin Center. That should be Moody Center. They need to update that. The AT&T Hotel and Conference Center. So like the Zolnik Ballroom, that's really part of AT&T, so we wouldn't need it for that. But the special events room at Rolling Hall, that's when we would need it. So there's a link that we have on the intranet. There's a link that we're going to have on our OEF that has that provost approval. If you're going to have alcohol in an off-site event, off campus, you don't need that. It's only for the buildings owned and controlled by UT Austin, UT System. Dates. So really want it to go over dates, because this is a big thing. I've seen some people think a blanket can just encompass like maybe 3 days, but so we want to go over single, multi-day, and blanket. The first one is single day, one event. That's it. It's going to be this event, this day. We really don't require any budget breakdown for that. If you want to provide a budget breakdown, you are definitely welcome to provide a budget breakdown for that. The multi-day events. So this needs, we just have to ensure that is the same type and the same purpose of event. So the date range can be across several days. A good example is definitely a conference. That's going to be Thursday through Saturday. That is when we would consider that a multi-day event. And that conference could then encompass breakfast, lunch, dinner, possibly a separate reception afterwards. So you can encompass multiple things with that. But because it would encompass multiple things, we would require a budget breakdown for that because we want to see how many, breakfasts would be incorporated, throughout that date range, how many attendees per each event. And really what this minimizes is the need to create or submit a separate OOEF for each occurrence through that event period. So really the same thing with blankets, but where blankets are a little bit different, same type and same purpose. So main thing with blankets, same type, you're having all brown bag seminars throughout the entire fiscal year. An example of not a blanket is you can't put team meetings, holiday parties, birthday celebrations. Those are all 3 different types of events. So you would have to do 3 different blanket OEFs for that. Best practices, the date range, we really want to try and just encompass the entire fiscal year. The entire fiscal year is September 1 to August 31st. I did put on here that per semester can be considered a blanket. There is just the one caveat to that. So your spring semester is completely fine. It's when you get to that first semester, that fall semester, and it's mainly because the academic year has changed. Since the academic year is starts in 8/15, we can't do you couldn't do a blanket for the fall semester 8/15 to 12/31. The reason why you couldn't do that is because the 8/15 to 8/31 is in our current fiscal year. 9/1 to 12/31 would be in next fiscal year.
You can keep going.
So those are just kind of things to consider. That's why I say really kind of best practice, encompass the entire fiscal year. That way you don't have to do 2 separate ones for that small little period at the end. Again, with this, we're going to require a budget breakdown. We want to see what are all of those brown bag dates that you're going to be encompassing throughout that blanket time period, and how many are your kind of estimated approximate number of attendees per each. So what's the amount that you're figuring per each date of the event? Again, it minimizes the need to recreate and submit an OOEF for each occurrence. So I know previously, 2-3 years ago, you had to submit an OOEF for breakfast, you had to submit an OOEF for lunch, you had to submit an OOEF for dinner. So we're trying to encompass it all into one. Now the OOEF process. So these are there's more required information that we have on here, but these are just the most common things that we wanted to address. Account. We want to make sure that the account does allow object codes. And the define command is G07 in order to check that. Again, not everybody has access to that. This is something that the AOMs would really want to be checking when it gets to them. So these are just the different event types. 1309 are all student-related events. 1329 are for flowers and or other perishable items. So these are 2 and 4 individuals.
Not your decor at your event.
So if there was a faculty member, just an example, if there was a faculty member that possibly had a death in the family and the department wants to send flowers, that's when you would select 1329. 1347 are business and other administrative events. So the 1309, we use a lot for all of our student. Everything else would be 1347.
To note, student events, that 1309 object code, we cannot put alcohol on that object code. So if you are doing a student-related event that is going to have alcohol at that, just know that my team is likely going to reach out to you for a separate account for the alcohol expenditures. If your account number doesn't allow for that.
Event name. So if it is a blanket, you can indicate, I think of what I've seen, department chair meetings. I would put department chair meetings, the fiscal year. What is it going to encompass? Just get, what is the name? If it's a conference, it's this particular conference. This is the one that I see a lot, and I really wanted to address is event purpose and benefit. I've seen it where it has the exact same thing, the exact same information. This should be different information. So what is the actual purpose of the event and how is it going to benefit the department and UT? That should never be the same because they are two different things. Okay. And just really participant information. So currently, I mean, anything 10 and under, UT requires name, title, and affiliation
Of each attendee.
So if you have 5 attendees, we need to have all that information included. And I put on here for payment processing, because if there's as you're doing the either blanket OEF or just maybe a single one, and you're like, oh, this faculty member wants to have a lunch meeting, they've got an out-of-town guest, but we're not sure what other faculty members within that department is going to attend it. It's okay at the initial submittal that you might not have that information, but that information is required when it comes time for the payment processing. 11 or more, we just require the group name and the approximate number of attendees for that event. I have on here a link to the OEF submittal. So what I'm going to do is just preview a new submittal. And really what I'm previewing is because currently, as we're submitting OEFs, you're submitting it via DocuSign Power Form. So we're looking at moving away from the DocuSign portion of it, and the submittal is an online submittal form where it's the exact same fields that are on the Power Form. The information would transition over to DocuSign because that's how we would still be getting currently the AOM and Caitlin's signature. But by transferring this, moving over to an online form, this is where we'd be able to really pull some data and have some data analysis, which would help with the multi-day events and especially the blanket events. So bear with me as I end the slideshow so I can share the screen for the submittal so everybody online can see it. Okay, so this is what the online form, oh, you can see that. Sorry about that. This is, can y'all see it? Everybody can see it even online?
Looks like it.
Okay. So this is what the online submittal would have. There is going to be some logic on there. So, for instance, I'll do a little bit of a preview since we have some time. If it's 1329, we're just going to end, we don't need all the information for 1329. Alcohol is never going to be served with flowers or anything like that. So we just put some logic in there. Event name, location, start date, purpose, benefit. Those are all required stuff. And then just give us the person that the flowers are going to be sent to and the cost amount. 1329 and 1347 are going to really have some similar stuff. Departments, you're just selecting your department. So it's all that portion is gonna really be the same. Again, everything that is submitted on here is stuff that will transfer over into the DocuSign. So we're just moving from, you're actually filling the stuff out on the DocuSign form into an online form. Okay, let me go back to play from current slide. Okay. So payment reimbursement submittal. We utilize Tracker to submit all of our entertainment invoice and reimbursements for processing. So you go to that Create tab, go down to entertainment. It's only entertainment.
Yeah, even if you have a contract, when you're submitting your payment or your reimbursement request, you want to select entertainment every single time.
Approval signatures. So when you're submitting the invoice and the reimbursement for processing, you must include a copy of that OOEF. So it needs to have the approved signatures on there. So the OOEF should have your AOM signature on there and the official delegate, meaning Caitlin's signature on there. You can't submit it, an approved OOEF is not going to just be the AOM signature. It has to have Caitlin's signature on there. And for those instances where alcohol or the per person university limit of $100 has exceeded, that's when we also need Dean Mills' approval signature. So sometimes that you don't know that has occurred until after the fact. When that happens, the AOM will just send me the OEF and I will send it to Dean Mills for signature approval. That way she's she's getting the DocuSigns consistently in the same manner. So OEF updates that you really need to be sure that you're looking at and updating. Maybe you put one account number on the actual request when you initially requested it, but now you want to update the account number and change it. You can totally do that. Just make sure it's updated. The event location. Main reason why I said event location, I've seen some submittals where it's TBD. We don't know. We actually don't know where it's going to be. Or you could just put off campus. Those two are not sufficient. We need to have where was it actually held. So update that event location. And then your post-event information.
The only instance you wouldn't have post-event information yet is if you're paying a deposit. Or again, that kind of prepayment, we need the check at this. So in those instances, it's okay. And you can just put deposit down at that field. So that's why we have the estimated information on the OOEF. With your payment request on the entertainment form, there is a section where you can specify if there's a contract. Again, we want to use that contracts plus contract number. It usually starts out with the academic year, currently 2024, and then an underscore, and then a 4-digit unique identifier number. That is the information that goes in that contract field. And if and when you have that contract number, you don't have to attach a copy of the contract. My team can find and access that contract and make sure it's available for AP to see. The only instance where you wouldn't have a contracts plus contract number is for AT&T contracts. And in that case, you just write C attached and you include it. AT&T, every time they send you an invoice associated with a contract, they send that contract to you in that email. So you just take it, put it together, attach that and send it with your payment request. And then we have that for AP's review.
The last portion, the OOEF request number, record number, we going to an online form, we will now be able to have a record number so that we can track expenses against a particular OOEF. I know a lot of times AOMs might get asked, hey, how much have I spent against this blanket OOEF or even the payment teams? I don't know because we don't have a way to track it right now. Having this request number, record locator number, we will be able to track it and give you, hey, this is actually how much you spent against this blanket OEF. So if this year you only put 5,000, we look and we do our analysis and you actually spent 6,500. Is it okay to go over? It is because y'all, the AOMs and the department chairs, y'all manage your accounts. But then you need to better estimate the following year. Don't put again 5,000 when you know you spent 6,500 in the current fiscal year. So that's where we're going to be able to get a more data analysis by going into an online system and having a record numbers.
So at the bottom of that OOEF form, there's post-event information. This is not changing. It's been the same. We frequently send these back because that information isn't there. This is required by UT's main Office of Accounting, Accounts Payable Group, who reviews and approves the documents that we create and send to them. They require that we specify the date of the event, or the date that the expense occurred. So again, on a blanket OOEF, this is super important so that we can identify which occurrence on your blanket OOEF this expense relates to. Again, if you bought something, say on February 1st for an event that you were having on February 10th, you'd want the date in the post event information to say February 1st, or February 1st, so it correlates to the receipts. This helps them identify that your expenses are there. But again, on the OOEF, it does still show the date of the event as February 8th. But again, that's your good service date. Number of participants. Every single time your number of participants is 10 or fewer, we require the name, title, and affiliation of each attendee. It's really important that this information matches. On the front end, again, you might be submitting your OOEF with estimated, or, this is our intent. And then after the fact, things change. If you have fewer attendees, that's fine. You just specify how many attendees you did have and who those actual individuals were. You need to make sure that the number of names and affiliations matches the number of attendees that you say you have at your event, and that's used to calculate the per person cost. So on your post-event information, your actual cost, this amount needs to match the expense that UT is paying or reimbursing with that payment submittal. So if a faculty member took a prospective employee to lunch and they ended up spending $120 per person, and we didn't get Dean Mills' approval to go over that $100 per person, UT is going to limit that reimbursement to the $100 per person. And so your actual cost may be different than what is on your receipt. Your receipt may show $600, whereas UT is only going to be reimbursing $400. That's what we need on the post-event information, is that $400. That's the expense to UT.
And if there are instances where you're capping, I've seen it where departments have just indicated capping at this amount.
Yep.
And that's sufficient as well.
Yep.
So
Becker and that OOEF need to show that same thing so that we know what the intent is. And again, if you put that note there, we can quickly and easily identify why it is and that it's not a typo or something that we need to come back and clarify on. And then average cost per person, again, you're just dividing your actual cost by your number of participants. This is only necessary if you do not have a contract. If you have a contract, you do not need to calculate that. We recommend putting in a -contract on the OOEF so that it draws AP's eye to the fact that we don't need that calculated. Sometimes when you calculate it with a contract, it'll show $120 per person. And they'll go, oh, we need Dean Mills' signature. We don't actually need it because we had a contract in place. So,
and it does
as
that
best we can.
And it still puts the calculation of the cost per person because of the logic that we have on the DocuSign form. That logic is still going to be there on the online submittal form as well. So it's just when we see contract, we're just going to kind of, when I see that there is a contract associated with it, I'm just going to overlook that and not update the routing for it to go to Dean Mills. One thing that I didn't discuss during the contract period, during the contract and the OEF process on the online submittal, we're just going to ask the question, is there a vendor contract? Yes or no? If there is, we are not going to require the contract to be attached with the OEF. When we first initiated the DocuSign Power Form, we didn't have some other processes in place. And we really were trying to figure out how can we make it a little bit easier to keep all of the information together, all the attachments together. Now we have business contracts where the payments team can access it. So we don't need the actual contract to be attached any longer. If it's yes, then it's good to go. The only attachments that we are going to require are the budget breakdowns when they're needed and the provost alcohol approval. Those are going to be the only two attachments that are going to be required with it. Last thing is really just our McCombs Entertainment dashboard. If you haven't gone to there, please start going there, because that is where we do have, let me end the slideshow again and go, here it is. This is where we have all of our entertainment resources. So we do have like the McCombs OOEF policy and procedures listed in there. I will update and remove the DocuSign process and put more of our online form process. We have the links to the handbook of business procedures. I have the link to the exception request to serve alcoholic beverages on campus, guidelines for welcome, farewell, and retirement, and then just a few of the direct bill vendors that we have. And then this eventually will be updated to the online form. This is the direct link to DocuSign. Moon Tower, we have the Moon Tower to go and voucher request form on here as well. So please make sure you're utilizing this and not just emailing Moon Tower. We want to make sure that we're utilizing this. We do have a few of the frequently asked questions on here. After this training, we will probably add to our FAQs on here. But really, anytime you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out to your AOM. As you're talking with your AOM, if you're still, maybe unsure, have some additional questions, y'all can reach out to myself or Stacy and her team. From there.
Ready for questions?
Yes.
We've got a couple online. I'll start with those and then we'll work in the room. The first question we had online is related to contract language as far as putting those estimated amounts and higher amounts. I think the concern is if you write your contract for a higher amount than your food and beverage minimum, the vendor may expect to get paid that much regardless. So I don't have any specific language advice right this moment, but we will get some and put that in the frequently asked questions section so that you can make sure your language is in there. The food and beverage minimum is this amount. We anticipate it could be up to this amount, but that's not a guaranteed thing so that the vendor isn't concerned about getting that.
Once we have the guidance from business contracts regarding that particular question, that will definitely be on our FAQ section within the entertainment. I will go ahead and just also add it to the contracts portion of our intranet as well. That way it's in both areas because it would be contract related.
The next question is, what are the rules around serving alcohol on campus if undergraduates will be present?
That is not allowed. That's a big no-no. Please do not do that.
And then we have a question about blanket OOEFs. Do we need to list out each location on the form itself if there will be multiple locations? For a blanket OOEF, probably not. You might list one or two. Again, the main thing that we need is a general idea of what your event is going to be. And then anytime a payment or a reimbursement request is submitted, that event location needs to be updated to match where it actually took place. So that, again, UT's main office of accounting can confirm that we are meeting the requirements as far as having any approvals that are needed, having any exceptions approved. Again, we have a contract in place if it's needed, so on and so forth. So it's estimated on the front end when you're requesting your OOEF, and it's required to be accurate on the post-event information after the fact for the payment or reimbursement. The final question we have in the chat right now is, can you please clarify what the rules are on reimbursements with respect to tax on the receipts? So this is a really good question.
We get that very often.
There is a straight answer, but it kind of gets convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, if you are in a restaurant eating at the restaurant, yes, we can reimburse you the tax. If you are taking the food away from the restaurant, if they are delivering it, if they are serving it on campus, if they are direct billing us after the fact, no, we cannot cover sales tax. Additionally, to note, gratuity is limited to 20% based on the subtotal, not the total included with tax. So if you have somebody requesting a reimbursement they went and picked up pizza and brought it back to campus, they can't get taxed for that. So that needs to be taken off before it's submitted into tracker. And then the tax needs to be adjusted accordingly to match that 20% total. Again, that's something that my team helps audit for, and typically we'll just make that correction if needed and move it forward. We'll add notes in tracker. We're not necessarily going to reach out to you every single time we make that correction. But if it's a pretty drastic amount, we usually will reach out and just give you a heads up. Here's why we're doing this.
So in regards to gratuity, I know the question has already been posed about some restaurants that where their gratuity, it indicates on the receipt, their gratuity is calculated after tax because of their point of system sale that they're utilizing. I've already asked a question to accounts payable. How can we address that? Because that's the restaurant is doing that. So how can we address that if it's already, that's where the restaurant's calculating it, and that's not where UT's looking at it.
There is.
So right now, what I've just suggested is don't give the actual 20% currently right now, because UT won't, because it's going to go over that. Do either an 18%
Yeah.
or, just do the 15 or 18. Don't do that max 20.
Or calculate yourself based on
Yes.
your subtotal. Also kind of along those lines, occasionally, if you have, say, 10 people, a restaurant will force gratuity and they'll include that on the receipt. Most often you see that, and it is a 20% gratuity charge. If they do, they have a mandatory gratuity and it's, say, 22%. UT will reimburse that provided you specify and the whoever's being reimbursed attests that in fact that was required, mandatory by the restaurant, could not be avoided. Again, then they're not out that money. But UT will not ever grant an exception if it wasn't the restaurant making that requirement. But again, that's where a note needs to be added so that my team knows that and can let AP know about that as well.
Any questions here? Yes, ma'am.
So in regards to tax when they're at a restaurant, they do reimburse for it. So what about if like I have dinner with no OOEF at a restaurant and I pay my hotel events card after? That tax is not allowed with that though, right? Because we're directly paying for the
Correct. That's my understanding. Yeah.
And then I also have a question. Some restaurants will like have on an automatic service fee, which includes, and they'll say like, oh, part of that goes towards our wait staff and servers. Can we still add on a gratuity to that, or is that service fee considered a gratuity we can't add on?
In most instances, that's considered the gratuity and you cannot go above and beyond that. There are some restaurants that on their tickets, it specifically says this service charge is not a gratuity, in which case you can go again, 20% on your subtotal, which should not include their service charge amount. So it gets kind of tricky. You can do that. We have to draw AP's attention to the fact that it says this is not gratuity. Most of the time it is considered
And
the
to
gratuity.
me, that's one that can be very subjective. Like the person that's at the event, they may not feel it's gratuitous if it's not explicitly indicated on the receipt anywhere.
Yeah, so for
We
those
could think it
online-
is. When it gets to AP, they could think it is, or we could think it's not as well, but when it gets to AP, they think it is. I mean, we can't get to the point where we're having to research, okay, what is the service charge for this particular vendor? We just have to then provide that a little bit more detailed information when it gets to AP.
Yeah, so for those online, the question was, if a restaurant includes a service charge line on their ticket, does that count as gratuity? Do you tip on top of that or not? Again, the answer is most of the time, yes, that is considered the gratuity. UT will not reimburse above that unless their receipt specifically specifies this is not a gratuity, in which case you can add that 20% gratuity.
Gratuities can be, if you have any questions regarding gratuities, even after this, just before you submit, don't hesitate to just ask. It's better to ask than to just have that unknown.
Yeah, so
And we will
another-
definitely put information regarding gratuities on the FAQ page.
We'll also put some information about contracts there. There's another question about contracts online. Says, can you repeat the contract attached with the OOEF? So there's kind of two parts of that. The first part is on the front end, prior to your event, when you're submitting your OOEF request, you do not need to attach a copy of your contract. There is simply a yes or no question that asks, is there a contract? And you answer yes or no, or will there be, even if it's not fully executed yet. If you have one in progress or you know you're going to have one, then you answer yes to that question. The purpose of that is, again, to help Michelle and Caitlin on the back end when they're reviewing know, oh, you've said your budget is this, well, that's over $100 per person. But again, if you have the contract, that's disregarded.
And the DocuSign form has been updated. Again, right now, current process, we are still in DocuSign. The online submittal, we were just giving y'all a preview because that is what we're looking at implementing, hopefully within the next week or two. But I wanted to have the opportunity to at least preview the online submittal form with you. The DocuSign Power form, that is a yes or no, that attachment is going to just be optional right now. Online, once we move to the online submittal form, it's just going to be a yes or no. And that attachment's not going to show up if it's a single day event and it's single day event and you're not going to serve alcohol in a UT building. You will never see the attachment come up if you select, yes, there's a vendor agreement.
So,
Yes, ma'am.
So we have events that have multiple expenses like floral, photographers, all kinds of stuff. So when we create the initial OOEF, is that what the amount should be, or is it just for like the catering part of it?
it's for everything.
You want to encompass all of your expenses, and that's where you would provide that in your breakdown.
And is it better to overestimate than underestimate? Because we do ours well in advance because there's so many things to be done in the 2 weeks before an event. So some of them are just kind of best guesses.
Yes, I would just say best practice. I would estimate on the higher end rather than on the lower end. And I mean, you don't have to overestimate drastically. If you're doing even your single day event way in advance and you're like, oh, we might have 5,000. I mean, when you're looking at your budget breakdown, currently you're looking at a 5,000 expense. But you know that there might still be other expenses that you will need to include later on. Go ahead and just put that kind of figure in there and just do maybe in your in your kind of breakdown, do maybe some pending expenses and put that's where you could put that that gap.
Miscellaneous budget.
And ours then, especially with that, when you're using that outside AV company, it goes over $100 per person. And we just put that on there.
So, but with that, you would more than likely have some type of contract.
That's true.
So, this is what I've also seen where some people will say no, but it's a pretty large event. You're going to have some type of contract associated with that.
Yeah.
So when you have some type of contract associated with that, that's when it's okay if you go over that $100 per person.
So if you have, again, you're doing a blanket OOEF and you know that some of the events on there you will have a contract for, you may not have one. Go ahead and answer yes anyways. That's kind of, if you will have a contract at some point for something associated with that, and that OOEF, your answer is yes.
And then what kind of supporting documentation is best? Like our budget or?
The budget breakdown will be required when you submit your OOEF for multi-day events or blanket.
And
events.
we're gonna have a budget template kind of created, just as and put on the intranet, and there'll be links on the actual submittal form as well. It's gonna be a template that y'all can use. Yes, ma'am.
I have a specific question. I have a contract for one day event, and then we decide we're going to have a reception the day before, associated with the same event, but it's something that wasn't on the original contract or the original OEF. do I need to do an amendment to the contract, and do I need to submit another OOEF?
If the reception is gonna be associated with that same vendor, that's when you need to do an amendment to the contract. You don't have to you don't have to resubmit an OEF. That's again, so we're trying to get away from that. I think that was required in the past, 2-3 years ago, where if you're going over a budget, you have to resubmit an OEF because this is your amount now. Again, y'all are managing your funds, so you know if you can accommodate that overage or not, but you would definitely, that's when an amendment would need to be done to the contract.
The OOEF actually has a line item for a dinner and reception line, before it's just with a different vendor than.
Yes.
So, I do need an amendment, but no noise.
Correct. So the main thing is with what the OEF is, the requesting of the OEF, it's getting approval that, yes, you can have this event. This is all the information that we need to see on the OEF submittal. And then there is after the event where we need required information in order to make the reimbursement and or payment to the vendor.
Yeah, so again, before your event, all you're providing us with is estimates. After your event, that's where you're confirming these were the actual details of what's going. So that's what we refer to as the post-event information, which is part of, on our form, it's at the bottom of that form. So that's where it can kind of get confusing. Again, with the payment requests, we are required to provide specific information about what actually occurred. Similarly, on the payment request, you don't have to attach a copy of your contract if it's a contracts plus contract. We can find that for you and make sure AP has access to see that. If it is an AT&T contract, because those go through Caitlin rather than Business Contracts Office, you do have to attach a copy of that into Tracker when you're submitting your request there.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we're submitting for our different vendors, and we submit the same OOEF, attach the same OOEF, what do we do for filling out the bottom? Is that like the total cost of?
It matches your Tracker record per your vendor or payee. So that OOEF that you're submitting on that Tracker record needs to be updated to match that Tracker record only.
And you
The-
definitely would have different payments. I mean, if you're having a multiple vendors, it's what was the cost per this vendor? So it really moving to the online submittal, once we do implement that, don't hesitate to reach out and say, hey, I maybe don't understand this logic that is put in place. Can it do this? Don't hesitate to provide some suggestions. Because this is, I mean, we are moving to the online submittal. We can always improve it.
Yeah, there's a question about our timeline for that, when we'll be releasing that online form. At the moment, we're waiting for some feedback from Maine UT about what they're going to allow, what we can change on our form, so on and so forth. So as soon as possible, we will get that to you. We will make sure that all of the intranet links are updated. We'll send out an email notification to all of the AOMs and say, hey, we're going live with this submittal. Again, once we go live with it, does not mean that we cannot make changes to it. Our goal is to continually update this form to be the most useful. We're trying to anticipate what's easiest for you guys to use that still gets us what we need. But again, we're open to feedback on that. And that's the way that we will kind of maintain process improvement, is for you guys to let us know, or at least ask questions. Some things aren't technologically possible within the systems that we're using. And sometimes Maine AP won't let us make certain changes, but we'll do what we can.
Very hopeful that I would have already had the feedback from Maine accounts payable. And unfortunately I have not. So that's why I didn't want to not preview it with y'all, because I want to at least, communicate out, hey, this is really what we're looking at going towards. Any other questions? If you can't think of any now, but you get back to the office and somebody asks you a question about event related and it wasn't addressed, again, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm available on Teams. You can easily Teams me. You can send an email. So don't hesitate. We'd rather y'all ask the questions so that we can better help y'all. After this, we will be hosting a travel refresher that is going to be scheduled towards the end of February. And then we are looking at also providing some open forum training sessions. So really just we'll probably reach out, hey, we've had the travel refresher, what are some other training refreshers basically that you would like for us to address? If there are any instances, especially regarding entertainment, that you would like us to do any individual department trainings, please don't hesitate to request those. Say, hey, I really have some, Carla, I'm just going to call you out of there. If you want to have just individual trainings with maybe some of your student org leaders regarding the OEF submittal, don't hesitate to reach out and say, hey, can we do this training just specifically to the student orgs? Don't hesitate to ask for that. We are more than happy to do some individualized, especially if you might have some particular questions just for your group. Again, don't hesitate. And it doesn't have to be just entertainment. It can be travel, it can be purchasing, it can be contracts related.
There's just one that I just thought of that comes up every once in a while and it relates to alcohol, and specifically when there's multiple vendors and there's generally one vendor that's a primary vendor of alcohol. So then when there's a payment that's made to the single vendor and that individual payment is for over 50% alcohol, but the total event that is not more than 50% alcohol, is just to make sure in that case, the alcohol exception, everything is not required, but we do require the additional food that shows that this is not more than that for the total event.
Yeah.
In case somebody was.
So to make sure those people online heard, one of our payment team members brought up the situation where we have one OOEF, we paid one vendor for alcohol and we paid a separate vendor for the food portion. And our food costs did exceed our alcohol. So we don't need Dean Mills approval. But the way that we have to document that for the Office of Accounting so that they can see why we don't have Dean Mills' signature is to reference that other payment for the food. Because again, our OOEF is only going to show the information relevant to the vendor that we're paying. So if we're paying Joe's Bar $400, then in the notes section, we would also reference and say, we paid Mandola's Italian Kitchen $800 for food on this document. You may not have a document ID. If we've already processed it, you will, but that's where you can reference a tracker record, that information. And again, we'll put it in the appropriate way for accounts payable to recognize that detail.
Eventually, we will probably have just one additional training around entertainment. And I know I'm just communicating right now out what is eventually going to be coming. I probably within the next 6 months, and it's regarding contracts. Those that I've told, I'm going to just express and some of y'all might have been included in the main purchasing kind of meeting around this. It's a vendor called America to Go. So this is a vendor where you could get some brown bags. You could even just do one-offs. It could also encompass caterers. So once the university, it would be a university-wide contract with this vendor. Once this happens and you pick a vendor out of that system, you would not have to do your own individual contract with that vendor. So it would alleviate some of the contracts that we're doing with specific vendors if that particular vendor is in the system. So, and with this, it's possible that the university could even update the entire OEF process altogether. There is a possibility. So everything that we've discussed today is the university's current. There are some things that I know throughout my time here at McCombs that we've addressed with the university, i.e. one is the per person. 2 years ago, the limit was 75. They finally adjusted it and went up to 100. Previously, the individual flowers were only 100 and now that's 200. So there are definitely some changes. We're evolving. We're moving forward. So just know that there could potentially be some additional updates and changes within the next 6 months. Okay. Any other questions in person, online?
There is one question about America to Go. If we work with a vendor a lot, can we suggest that they talk to you to get on that vendor list?
Yes, please email me. Any vendors that you talk to regularly or deal with regularly, please send me an email with a list of those vendors. We're actually meeting with the the new procurement director, and I can provide that listing to them. So I'm meeting with them on the 13th. So if you could provide anything, any information to me within the next, probably by next Friday, I would appreciate it. Okay. Well, thank y'all so much for attending. If y'all have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Bye, everybody online.